They say New York never slows down, but sometimes the city gives you a moment so quiet, you feel like you've stepped outside time. That was the kind of evening when it all began. Snow fell lazily through amber streetlight, catching the glow in perfect silhouettes before melting against blues of the pavement. The world outside roared with honks and hurried footsteps. Yet here, on the corner of 7th Avenue, a small brick-front cafe called Maple Roast felt like another universe. The smell of espresso and baked cinnamon rolls tugged at every passerby. Inside, low jazz hummed through the speakers, and the clink of ceramic cups mingled with whispers from tired students and couples hiding from the bite of winter. At the back, half shadowed by a wall lamp, sat Nathan Hale. He looked ordinary enough, another man on a laptop with a coffee mug going cold beside him. But Nathan wasn't ordinary. He was the CEO of Transglobe Logistics, a man paid to anticipate problems before they bloomed into catastrophes. Tonight, though, his commanding presence had cracked slightly under the weight of a single obstacle. Language. His inbox had delivered a time bomb, a 70-page contract fresh from Marseille, riddled with clauses, hidden annexes, tariff amendments, all in French. And worse, buried among them was a last-minute port change, the kind that demanded confirmation, not leisurely browsing. He had 1 hour, give or take, before a vessel sailed across the Atlantic without their cargo booked on it. If that happened, delays would ripple across the company's entire network. Millions lost, lawsuits blossoming, clients abandoning ship. A slow-motion catastrophe. Normally his people handled this. He paid them for it. But his top translator was in the hospital, the backup unreachable. Nathan leaned back, neck tense, eyes burning. He had fed the document through 3 different apps. Each butchered the phrasing, twisting legal meaning into nonsense. What looked like fees for berth docking 1 second, translated as punishment for refusing docking, permission the next. Useless. He knew one mistranslation could bankrupt the deal. He rubbed his face and stared at the screen. That was when he noticed her, Ellie. 6 months of quick hellos, paper cups filled with black coffee, polite thank yous before he ducked back into his corner seat. Blonde ponytail tied neatly behind her, hands steady as they worked the steaming machine, eyes calm. She never pried into the laptop glare he lived behind. She was a barista, nothing more. Or so he thought. But today, she did something different. She walked over. "You look like you're having trouble with the French," she said softly, her voice deliberate but gentle. She nodded at the laptop. "I know a little. I could take a quick look. If you'd like." Nathan blinked. The words pressed against his pride. This wasn't a takeout order. This was a multi-million-dollar legal minefield. Yet when his eyes met hers, there was something he didn't expect. Zero curiosity. Zero ambition. Just sincerity. Confidence without arrogance. Empathy without pity. His chest tightened once. Then he turned the screen toward her. Ellie leaned slightly over the table, scanning the French passages. Within seconds, her eyes darted quick over the lines. Then her lips parted. She began translating aloud. Not haltingly, not guessing, but fluid, correcting terminology as she went. Dock dues instead of port fees. Dates restructured properly into French legal style. Her tone precise, professional, low enough he had to lean closer to hear. What stunned him wasn't the words but the way she handled them. With the understanding of someone who knew what not to misinterpret. She wasn't simply reciting French into English. She was decoding strategy. "Mind if I see the annex? The German one?" she asked, lifting an eyebrow. Nathan's pulse spiked. "German?" He scrolled down. She bent closer, eyes narrowing on a line his app had mangled. "This isn't just delay fees," she said. "It's penalties for late customs clearance. Legally very different. Don't let them keep that phrasing." Nathan blinked. "You read German too?" Ellie gave a shy smile. "A little. Let me see the last page." Her gaze cut immediately to a Spanish footnote buried in fine print. "This bit about insurance," she explained calmly, pointing. "It implies full liability, but the intent is clearly partial liability unless negligence is proven. If you sign this as is, they could charge you for damages well outside your control." Nathan sat silent, the hum of cafe chatter fading around him. He closed his laptop halfway, staring at her like someone finally seeing a painting after staring too close to the canvas. "You know all 3 of these," he whispered. Ellie refilled his lukewarm coffee with one hand, her motions as casual as if they were just talking weather. 6, she answered simply, and walked away, back behind her counter to wipe mugs, as though she hadn't just slipped her hands into the gears of an empire and kept them spinning. Nathan sat frozen in awe. His entire body was still, caught between disbelief and revelation. Outside, snow blurred the city. Inside, He realized a barista had just managed what his legal team could not. Later, as the cafe softened around him, he called her back with a nod, turning his laptop toward her again. "Would you mind looking at just one more section?" Ellie came without hesitation. This time it was Italian, a dense annex so dull most lawyers skimmed it. She barely paused, her finger tracing down lines until she stopped on one buried sentence. "Here," she said, voice sharper now. "Storage fees calculated by gross volume. Looks harmless, but it isn't. If this wording holds, they can charge you for imagined airspace, stacking empty volume and billing you for it. Worse, they've tied this clause to customs holds, meaning if your shipments get delayed at the border for any reason, they can shove the goods into dead storage pricing." "That is devastating." Nathan's throat tightened. "How devastating?" "Millions," Ellie replied, "and they don't even have to notify you until it's too late." Nathan felt the floor tilt. He had read that section. So had his legal team, multiple times. None had caught the trick clause. His disbelief edged to awe. "I can rewrite it for you," Ellie offered calmly, pulling a black pen from her apron. "Just in English for now. You'll need a professional to draft the formal version, but this will hold in negotiations." On a napkin, she scribbled a clean, clear rephrasing. Short, sharp, impossible to misinterpret. She closed every loophole in one paragraph, capturing liability caps, duration limits, and customs exceptions. Nathan stared at it like a holy relic. How had this woman, pouring cappuccinos in a cafe, caught a dagger his own legal division had missed? "You studied this?" His voice was low, almost reverent. Ellie only shrugged, her lips quirking. "Languages," she said simply. "The rest I learned along the way." He wanted to press her. How? Where? Why? But her eyes told him not to. Some silences deserved respect. He exhaled, closed his laptop, and smiled faintly. "I owe you dinner." Ellie shook her head, pulling her coat from its hook. "Thank you, but I can't." "Why not?" Nathan asked, half teasing. "I have to pick up my son," she said with plain honesty, tucking her hair beneath a knitted beanie. "Daycare closes at 7. She nodded politely, stepped out into the snow, and for a brief moment her shape was visible through frosted glass before the wintry blur swallowed her whole. Nathan remained at the table, hearing only her voice replaying steady in his mind, the sound of someone who could read between lines not just in language but in life. She had saved his deal, his company, yet walked off without asking for so much as a thank-you coffee card. Later that evening, after closing, the golden lights of Maple Roast dimmed as Ellie ended her shift. Outside, Nathan waited in his car across the street, headlights off, snow collecting on his windshield. He wasn't there out of suspicion. It was something deeper, quieter, gratitude looking for somewhere to rest. As she emerged, scarf wound tight around her neck, she stooped in a practiced motion beside the building. Her arms swung up, catching a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 4, bundled in a too-thin coat, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold. He didn't complain. He simply leaned his head against her shoulder and let himself be carried. Nathan blinked slowly. She had never mentioned a child, never once hinted at the weight she carried outside of language and latte foam. He followed from a distance, not closely enough to alarm her, just enough to stay in sight, like a shadow moving at a respectful pace. She walked several blocks through slushy sidewalks and flickering street lamps, shifting the boy's weight every now and then with the skill of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. They passed by a row of Christmas-lit shops, and she paused outside a small market with a faded discount groceries sign. Inside she moved with precision, picking up a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a few bananas. Nothing extra, no impulse treats. Nathan noticed how she paused at the end cap display of holiday chocolates, considered, then moved on without reaching for them. At the register she paid in cash. Then she knelt down, wrapped her scarf around the boy, and kissed the top of his head before stepping back into the cold. The final stretch of their walk led them to a squat brick building with peeling paint and a broken porch light. The kind of place people passed by without looking twice. She balanced the groceries in one hand, shifted the boy to her hip, and disappeared inside. Nathan remained in his car for a long moment, staring at the door she had just entered. He didn't know what he had expected to find. Not this. Not a woman who could dissect international legal loopholes and still carry her son home through the snow like it was just another Tuesday. Later that night, he returned. The block was quiet, the snow muffling the world like a thick blanket. He parked across the street, pulled his coat tighter, and approached the stoop. In his hands, a small paper bag filled with things she wouldn't buy for herself. A box of crayons, a stuffed polar bear, a few chocolate bars, a fresh pair of gloves, child-sized. He tucked a sealed envelope between the folds of the bag. No name, no return address. Inside, a few hundred in cash, enough for warmth, enough for food, enough for something unexpected, and on a folded card in his handwriting. Thank you for saving an entire global shipping route with a pen and a napkin. This is only gratitude. No strings attached. He placed the bag gently in front of the door, then stepped back. No knocking, no announcement. Nathan returned to his car, started the engine, and disappeared into the falling snow, leaving only the warmth of a gesture he couldn't say out loud. The lobby of Transglobe Logistics was sleek and quiet, humming with the efficiency of a global corporation. Glass walls framed views of Midtown Manhattan, and the scent of polished marble lingered faintly in the air. Ellie stood just inside the revolving doors, holding her son's small hand. Benji clutched a worn, stuffed bear under one arm, eyes wide as he looked up at the towering ceilings and moving escalators. Ellie's other hand held a white envelope folded flat against her coat. Her fingers gripped it tightly. She approached the front desk. The security guard, a man in his 50s with a clipped tone and sharp eyes, looked up from his tablet. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Ellie said politely. "I'm here to return something to Mr. Hale. It's personal." The guard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Hale doesn't take walk-ins, especially not without credentials. I understand, but if you could just tell him." "Ma'am, I can't let you through. Please step aside." Ellie's voice caught in her throat. She looked around. Several employees passed by, their designer coats rustling, eyes flickering toward her and Benji, quick assessing glances, like scanning something that didn't belong in the frame. Someone whispered near the elevators. "Is she lost?" "No, I think she's trying to see the CEO." Ellie bent down to adjust Benji's scarf, using the motion to steady herself. Her heart pounded, not from anger, but from the sudden weight of being out of place. She hadn't meant to cause trouble. She just wanted to give something back, to return the envelope she hadn't touched since finding it on her doorstep. She stood preparing to thank the guard and leave when a voice cut clean through the noise behind her. "Help, stranger." "She's not a stranger." Everyone turned. Nathan stood at the far end of the lobby, coat still on, briefcase in one hand. His gaze didn't waver. "He's the reason this company didn't lose $2 million last week." He walked toward them. The guard straightened. A few people stopped mid-step. Nathan reached Ellie and looked at Benji, then back at her. "You came all the way here." "I didn't want to keep the money," she said quietly, holding out the envelope. "I didn't help you because I expected anything. I helped because someone needed help." Nathan took the envelope but didn't look at it. His eyes stayed on her. "You didn't have to bring it back." "I did," she replied. "And if you still need help with contracts or translations or whatever it is, I'd rather do it the right way. Not as a favor. As a job." Nathan nodded slowly. There was a pause between them, not hesitant. Just full. "We just got a contract revision out of Tokyo. Legal's behind on the language review. It's technical. Freight insurance terms and customs exceptions. No one on my team is fluent enough to handle it." Ellie tilted her head thoughtful. "Is it informal or plain form?" Nathan smiled just slightly. "Both." She gave a small confident nod. "Send it over." A few people in the lobby were still watching, but Ellie didn't notice anymore. Benji tugged on her coat, and she bent down to smooth his hair, whispering something that made him smile. Nathan stood beside her, less like a CEO now, and more like someone who had just remembered what trust looked like. He looked at the guard, hissed and quiet but firm. "Next time she comes in, don't ask for an appointment." Then he turned back to Ellie. "Welcome to Transglobe." The first weeks passed quietly. Ellie came in 3 afternoons a week, sometimes 4. Her desk was tucked near the translation and legal department on the 12th floor, away from the noise of logistics operations. She kept her head down, her notes precise, her suggestions direct and useful. No one questioned why she was there after the second week. Not when she revised a Portuguese customs clause that saved a shipment from being delayed in Sao Paulo, or when she identified a mistranslated Korean liability term that had snuck into a high-value contract. She didn't speak much, didn't overstep, but her work spoke clearly. Nathan noticed. He wasn't hovering, but he noticed. The way she read quickly with full comprehension. The way she switched between languages with no visible effort, like her mind simply shifted gears. Yet for all her fluency, she said very little about herself. One evening, long after the office had gone quiet, Ellie was still at her desk. Nathan passed by with his coat folded over his arm, paused, then stepped into the room. Working late, just finishing the Singapore freight clauses. They added a Mandarin section to the back page. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, watching her scroll. "I have a question," he said. Ellie looked up. "I still don't understand," he said slowly. "You're fluent in 6 languages. You can catch things most legal consultants miss. How did that happen?" Ellie hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. Snow was falling again, dusting the rooftops in soft white. When life doesn't translate for you, she said quietly, you learn to translate it yourself. Nathan didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. They sat in silence for a while side by side at the small conference table near the window. The lights were off. Only the glow of the city filtered through the glass, streaks of yellow and red blurring in the snow. It was one of those moments where no conversation was required, just shared quiet and the unspoken knowledge that both of them, each in their own way, had learned to survive without waiting for someone else to explain things. A few days later, it was Benji who brought the quiet to an end. It was mid-morning. Ellie was in the middle of reviewing a batch of French shipping terms when her phone buzzed. She checked it quickly, froze, then stood up. Nathan spotted her from the hallway. Everything okay? She didn't answer right away. Then the daycare called. Benji has a fever. They need me to come. Nathan didn't blink. Where is he? Upper West Side, I'll drive. She opened her mouth to protest, but he was already grabbing his coat. They rode in silence through light snow. The traffic unusually kind that day. At the daycare, Benji was curled on a cot, cheeks flushed, forehead warm. Ellie crouched beside him, stroking his hair. Nathan stood by the doorway, unusually still. When Ellie tried to lift her son, he stepped forward. Here, he said gently. Let me. He carried Benji to the car, holding him like someone who had done it before. Ellie didn't ask who he had done it for, she just watched. At the hospital, they waited. Nothing serious, just a viral fever. A few hours, some fluids, rest. Ellie sat beside the bed. Nathan brought coffee without asking. Later that evening, when Benji was dozing and the nurse had dimmed the lights, Nathan leaned against the wall near the window. You know, he said, voice low, that kid's Italian pronunciation is sharper than mine. Ellie smiled faintly. Loves when I read to him in different languages. He thinks it's magic. Nathan looked at her, then at the small boy asleep under hospital white sheets. It is. The tension didn't start all at once. It crept in quietly like a draft from an old window no one thought to close. It came through glances exchanged near the elevator, through conversations that paused just long enough to sting when Ellie entered the room, through whispers tucked inside what passed for jokes. At first, she ignored it. Ellie had long since grown used to being underestimated by customers who called her sweetheart while ordering lattes, by professors who dismissed her when she brought her baby to class, by employers who saw her as a temporary fill-in rather than someone building something permanent. She had learned to move forward anyway, but this felt different, more targeted, more deliberate. She used to make coffee downstairs, right? Yeah, crazy how fast some people climb when the CEO notices them. She must be really good at something. The letter that followed was soft, but the implications were razored. Still, Ellie kept working. She reviewed a Turkish rail freight contract line by line, corrected a dangerous mistranslation in a Russian customs agreement that could have cost the company hundreds of thousands, completed the quarterly audit Nathan had asked for 3 days ahead of schedule. Every task was precise, thorough, professional. It didn't matter. She felt the shift in the air around her. People who used to wave at her across departments now offered polite nods and excused themselves quickly. Slack messages lost their emojis. Emails dropped their greetings. Conversations in meetings moved around her instead of through her. She told herself it would pass, that what mattered most was the work. Then one afternoon, as she walked past a conference room, she heard it. The latte linguist, one voice said, amused, followed by another. She probably steams contracts better than milk. A pause, then laughter just loud enough to ensure she heard. Something inside her shifted. That evening, long after the lights on most floors had gone out, Ellie stayed behind. She moved quietly, collecting her few personal belongings. A USB drive, a notepad with margin scribbles in 5 languages, and a framed drawing Benji had made. Crayon lines curved into a picture of her at a desk. The title in blocky handwriting, Mom at Work. She placed the resignation letter on her desk. No melodrama, no tears, just the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly when it was time to walk away. The next morning, she returned early, before the buzz of emails, before the curious eyes, before anyone could stop her. She came only to return her badge, finish a few file transfers, and leave without notice. She was sorting the last of her folders when she heard footsteps behind her. Nathan stood in the doorway, still in his coat. He looked at the nearly empty desk, then at her, his expression unreadable. I heard, he said simply. Ellie didn't look up. Nathan stepped closer and placed a file on the table, a thick binder meticulously labeled. Inside the finalized framework for the Internal Language Systems Initiative, a proposal Ellie had quietly built months ago to unify Transglobe's multilingual operations into a seamless global standard. The stamp in the corner read, Approved. On top sat a clean white business card. The lettering was crisp, raised, certain. Ellie Winters, Director of Global Language Integration. She stared at it. Nathan's voice was calm but unwavering. It's not a promotion. It's a role you created. One this company didn't even know it needed until you walked in. Ellie finally met his gaze, her voice low but clear. I don't want a title handed to me because of whispers or out of pity. Nathan didn't blink. I'm not handing it to you. I'm naming what you've already built. Silence stretched between them, long, still, heavy with everything unspoken. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall again. Gentle, consistent, unconcerned with opinions. Ellie closed the binder slowly. She picked up the card, thumb brushing over her own name. She did not say yes, but she did not give it back either. Lucerne shimmered under a quiet curtain of snow. The city nestled between lake and mountains looked like a painting that had been paused mid-stroke, soft, still, almost unreal in its peace. Nathan, Ellie, and little Benji walked together along the cobbled path near the water. The old town's lights reflected in the river beside them. Their footsteps made only the faintest sound against the snow. It was late, but Benji was wide awake, bundled in a red coat, clutching a chocolate bar he had charmed out of a concierge earlier. He was chattering softly about ducks in the lake, about the hotel's elevator, about the 3 languages he'd heard in the hotel lobby that day. Nathan walked with one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding Benji's mittened hand. Ellie walked slightly behind, watching them, watching how Nathan slowed his stride to match Benji's shorter steps. How he listened when the boy talked, really listened. She wasn't sure when it had shifted, when Nathan had stopped being Mr. Hale, the powerful executive, and become this someone who read bedtime stories in broken Spanish, who showed Benji how to balance on a bike, who waited outside the dentist's office because he didn't want them to go alone. They crossed a small stone bridge, the snow falling more heavily now, brushing their coats and eyelashes ahead. Their hotel stood glowing like a lighthouse. Benji ran ahead shouting that he'd race them to the lobby. Ellie stopped walking. Nathan turned back. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her cheeks flushed, her breath visible in the cold air. Then, have you ever thought about putting a name on whatever this is? Nathan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Ellie didn't backpedal. Her voice was quiet, but steady. I mean us, you and me. This Nathan didn't speak right away. He looked at her. Really looked. Snow catching in her golden hair. Her eyes not uncertain, just vulnerable. Open in a way they hadn't been before. Then, without a word, he stepped closer, pulled something from his coat pocket, and dropped to one knee on the snowy street. Ellie gasped softly. Nathan opened the small velvet box. The ring inside wasn't elaborate. It wasn't glittering with oversized diamonds. It was clean, beautiful, refined, like something chosen by someone who valued meaning over performance. I don't need to define this anymore, he said, voice rougher than usual. Ellie, I love you, and I love Benji like he's my own flesh and blood. He glanced toward the boy, who was now peeking back over the bridge's stone railing. I want to build a life with both of you. For real. No spaces in between. No quiet, May. He looked back at her. Will you marry me? Ellie didn't speak at first. Tears swelled in her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. She looked at Nathan, her hand trembling slightly as she brought it to her mouth. Then she nodded. Once, then again, stronger. Yes, she whispered. Yeah. From across the bridge, Benji saw everything. His eyes lit up, and he ran back toward them as fast as his little boots could carry him. He threw his arms around Ellie's leg. She said yes, he shouted. She said yes. Then he turned to Nathan, beaming. Can I call you Dad now? Nathan dropped the ring box and pulled both of them into a hug, his voice breaking. Yeah, buddy, you can. They stood there, the 3 of them, wrapped in a moment that needed no translation. A year later, the waves of the Atlantic rolled in soft and slow against the shore of Maine. It was a quiet afternoon, late spring, the kind of breeze that smelled of salt and blooming things. A small gathering stood on a wooden deck overlooking the sea. No chandeliers, no grand ballroom, just driftwood chairs, white ribbons in the wind, and the sound of seagulls calling from the rocks. Ellie stood at the end of the aisle. Her dress was simple, ivory linen, flowing like seafoam around her feet. Her blonde hair was braided loosely, adorned with lavender sprigs from her late mother's favorite garden herb. Because this beach, this ceremony, had once been her mother's dream. A place she never reached. Today, Ellie brought her there in spirit. Nathan waited under an archway of white flowers, dressed in a soft gray suit, no tie, just a folded handkerchief in his pocket. The same lavender hue, and beside him stood Benji. Small, serious, with a banner nearly larger than his chest. He held the rings in a velvet box with both hands, face solemn like he understood the weight of the moment. When Ellie reached the front, her eyes met Nathan's, and nothing else existed. Not the guests, not the wind, not the months behind them. Only the future, steady, shared, chosen. The ceremony was short. Promises, laughter, a few tears. Benji sniffled when they said, "I do." And Ellie knelt down to hug him before the kiss. Later, after the guests had wandered off toward the reception tent, Ellie stood alone on the balcony of their rented beach house, looking out at the endless gray new water. Nathan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, chin resting lightly on her shoulder. "You ever think," he murmured, "that the woman who used to serve me coffee would end up being the person I'd love for the rest of my life?" Ellie smiled, leaning back into him. "No, but I always knew I'd be the one who understood you in any language." Nathan kissed her temples slowly. "And from today forward, I get Toby the man for both of you officially." She turned in his arms, hands on his chest. "You already were down on the beach." Benji was chasing the tide in histony vest and rolled up slacks, shrieking with joy every time the water touched his toes. His laughter carried on the wind. Ellie and Nathan walked down to meet him. 3 figures, 3 sets of footprints, 3 lives tied together, not by blood or chance, but by choice, trust, and something quieter than words. They walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, Benji between them, swinging their arms, toes splashing through the foam. The sun began to lower, tinting the water gold. The waves whispered something only the heart could understand. And that was the thing about love. It spoke in every language, and sometimes in none at all. A barista solves a guest's problem in 6 languages. But in the end, it was love, the language that needed no translation. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Ellie and Nathan's story. From a quiet cafe in New York to a windswept beach in Maine, their journey reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts, a helping hand, a shared silence, a translated sentence, can lead to something much greater than we ever imagined. Because in the end, love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it walks in quietly, asks if you need help with a French contract, and changes your life forever. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, hit the hype button to show your love. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales that speak straight to the soul. And don't forget to share this with someone who still believes in love, resilience, and second chances. We'll be here with more stories that heal, inspire, and remind you you're never alone. Until next time.